I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Hope you're having a good Thursday. Is it Thursday? It's Thursday, November 14th. Today, we're going to be walking through a demo of Financial Services Cloud and how we can automate a scenario in Financial Services Cloud, specifically focused on the insurance side of things. So we'll be going through an end-to-end scenario that we've built out, and I'll be adding in some additional steps to the test as well to show you how we can interact with this application. So a quick note before I get started, as always, there will be a Q&A function in the Zoom at the bottom there. Feel free to use that or to use the chat to chat with some of the other attendees. If you have any questions at any time, you can leave those there. We will address all the questions at the end in our formal Q&A. We usually dedicate about 15 minutes for that. So if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to use that at some point later on. But while I'm kind of getting things kicked off from my end, I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll just to gauge some of the audience. And I'll go ahead and kick that off now. So you should see that on your screen. Take a couple seconds to have that fill in there. Just want to get a good idea of who's currently using Financial Services Cloud, if anyone's utilizing it in any way in a production environment, and also how you're testing it would be an interesting additional question that maybe you could pop into the chat if you have any insights into that, but we'll be covering it today as well. So I'll give a few more seconds as everyone kind of finishes that poll there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll for now. Looks like we have a pretty good results there. Yeah, so at about 39% of you utilizing Financial Services Cloud out of the attendees today, so pretty good numbers there. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and kick us off today. Okay, so for those of you that don't know Provar, Provar is a interactive test automation solution where we can create test cases in and around Salesforce, but also any application in the web, any API or any database we can connect to and we can test for end-to-end testing. Salesforce is definitely our niche where we've kind of found our a lot of our built-in integrations are for testing Salesforce, and namely in Financial Services Cloud, we have some additional customized frameworks that we've built to handle some of the components in these different industries in Salesforce. So what I'm going to be running through is kind of a couple of different users in an end-to-end scenario to show you how we can utilize multiple users in the same flow, but also build out an end-to-end scenario inside of this application. So the first part of this application, I'm logged into our insurance service console here as an insurance agent. So utilizing persona-based testing. So I'm logged in as a specific user that's going to be performing their side of the test case. And kind of what we're going to be doing here is raising a claim as a customer. So the next part of this test case will have an actual community user. It's going to be filing a claim, an insurance claim. And then, of course, through Omnichannel, the insurance agent will get that claim in their queue. They'll pick it up and then take it from there. And then we'll discover the rest of the scenario. So I'll go ahead and just click resume here so we can begin looking at this test case here. So first and foremost, as stated, we're going to log in to the Omnichannel here. So we'll see that login here. All right, and just kind of minimize it there. And then the next part of this is from the policyholder perspective where we're going to be creating a claim. So I'll just click resume and we'll see that we will open up a new browser here. And Provar has the capability to open up connections through any user in your Salesforce org, and that includes community users. So if you have external community users, you can create a built-in connection for those users without requiring their credentials. So here I am logged into the Cumulus Insurance community website here, and I'm on my auto insurance policy page where I'm going to be creating a new claim. So I'll go ahead and resume this here. so we can see that execute out. Now, this creation of this claim will be through a series of different forms. So we'll see that kind of navigate through here, basically just selecting the vehicle, selecting what happened. So there was weather damage, and then the date of the incident. And then it'll go through and kind of set the time, set the location. So it happened in Nashville, unfortunately. And then setting the rest of this information here. And then the next part of this will actually begin filing the claim. So it'll open up a new little page here as soon as you click yes, and that will take us to the next page. Just setting in some basic information, uploading an image of the damage as well to that claim so the insurance agent can verify that. And then finalizing here with a validation as well. So no test case is complete without a UI assertion or a validation. So basically just checking that message. And you may not be able to hear it on your end, but on my end, I'm getting a little omni-channel ding because the insurance agent just has a new case in their queue. So I'll switch over to there, and you'll see it kind of shows up there, a little red dot. But before we switch over to that, I'll finish from the community user side of things, just extracting the case number, the claim number, and then validating a couple of things like the claim reason and the claim type as well. Okay, so we've accepted the claim from the insurance agent. So that happened just now through Omnichannel. And now, of course, that navigates us directly to the claim where we can begin setting up this case to work on it. So we're just going to add in the contact details and set this case to the next status. Then we're just going to confirm some basic case record info. So this would be the case record type. We're going to make sure that the origin is coming in from the website and that the claim type is correct there as well. So just making sure that that says auto claim NBA. And now we actually have a third persona that we're involving in this particular test case where we're logging in as an admin, which is our insurance producer, who's going to go ahead and start processing this claim information and adding in all the coverage. So that'll be a third connection here in this test case. You'll see that boot up here. And this user is just going to search for the claim by the claim number as we retrieved it from the community users webpage there. So once this is loaded in here, we'll see that search and then it'll navigate us to the claim that we just created. So this is that new insurance claim here. Okay. And then from here, it's just going to do another validation, making sure that the severity comes in as medium as the default here, and then set the status to open. So we have an open claim. And then we're going to begin the process of processing the coverage. So this will be going into the financials tab and adding in some coverage here based on the information that we know. So we'll set the claimant field to be Rachel Adams, who is our community user. And we'll set the insured item here to be the vehicle that we selected. We're going to set the coverage to a rental car, and then our maximum loss reserve for that coverage is $2,000. So we'll just set it to that there, and then we'll click the open to open up this coverage for this particular claim. Now, the next part of this is going to be coming in and adding a new loss item and beginning the process to review and process this particular claim. So it's still stepping through here, and I'll get to a stopping point in just a minute where I'll actually begin adding in some additional steps as well. So just another validation there. And you'll notice it's actually changing tabs as the test is executing. None of that tab navigation was added in as a test step. It's actually built into Provar. It handles that automatically. So as soon as you add a step to interact with an element, Provar knows which page to be on, which tab to be on before it tries to interact with that particular element. So all the page and tab navigation and application navigation is handled for you out of the box. So we're just setting the claim amount here to $2,000, and we'll click add here to add this new loss item. Okay, now we're going to set the status to contact. So from here, basically, the claim is in a contact status where the insurance agent needs to reach out to uh, the person who's raised this claim and basically begin processing the booking of that rental car. So we can, of course, we'll come back to this in just a minute. We can switch back and forth. So we'll go back over to our service agent here, our insurance agent. And I've already actually built out the flow to book this rental car, but I'm going to go ahead and just do that and show you how I created some of these test steps here. So everything in Provar Test Builder that you're seeing over here is showing you the status of my currently executed test case. And I can also add steps and drag them, move them around, edit them, of course, set breakpoints, delete steps, group them, all those kinds of things. But you can also, the primary function of Test Builder is for adding interactions with web elements in your page here. So if I want to, from the service agent, begin processing the rental car booking, what I'll need to do is figure out what that manual test case flow is, and then start mapping that into an automated step. So I'll begin that process here. So basically, I know I need to go ahead and click on this action item here. So I'll right click on the book a car action. And I'm going to switch this over to our, already had a existing field for this one, but we can use this particular one as well. So for things that aren't metadata supported, you'll notice that Provar will give you a predefined locator for those elements. So because this is a custom lightning action here on this particular component, it gives me a locator for that. So I've already built this out previously, so I'll just go ahead and execute that one, but let me just step through here. So that'll click on that button there, and then that'll open up the flow here to where we can begin filling in the information that we need to finalize this booking. So anything, again, I want to interact with. So for example, if I want to interact with this economy button here, we'll now see we get a slightly different view inside of Test Builder. And this is our custom framework that we have designed for Lightning Web components and a lot of velocity components in Insurance Cloud and other applications inside of Salesforce. So basically, it's more of a component-based architecture. So it gives us a more robust way to recognize elements that are highly customized if there's no metadata support for those elements. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because out of the box, Provar recognizes all Salesforce metadata supported fields, and they don't require any locators for those elements. The way that that works is basically the same. You right click and add to test case. The only difference is Provar doesn't need to define any static locator. It utilizes the metadata to create a dynamic and self-healing version of that element. But for this one here, this is a custom flow, so I need to go ahead and just give it a couple of information here. I've already mapped this before, so it's coming in. So I just need to define what my response is here. So I'll just put in economy and click add and do. So it'll set that field to economy, and then I can go ahead and right click on the next button and add to that to my test case as well. Once again here, this is it's a flow. So it's coming in supported by our custom framework. So we can just continue mapping that in here. Now, if you were doing this with another tool that wasn't Provar, if you were using something generic like Selenium or something like that, what you would end up having to do is inspect all of these elements as you're automating them inside of the actual DOM and the HTML and figure out how to locate those elements. The only problem with doing it that way is Lightning Web Components are nested inside what we call the shadow DOM, which is kind of a hidden version of the HTML that's only accessible through custom methods. Additionally, those locators are typically very dynamic. They utilize a lot of IDs, so those IDs can change. Anyone who's worked in Salesforce development or web automation long enough knows that IDs are never a good thing to use for any kind of locators because they tend to be very brittle. So what we're using here is not an ID. It's not a static locator or anything like that. So I'll just continue mapping some fields here so you can see how this works. We'll go ahead and set our next response here to nearest rental car office. Just type that in. And then I'll click on my next button here. It's the same button as the previous field, so nothing different there. Okay, now we can confirm that this rental booking is complete. So I'll just go ahead and right click on finish. And you notice a lot of these elements, I haven't highlighted this point yet, but they have this adaptive locator technology. And what this is actually our self-healing for all these elements here. So in other words, you don't see any specific locator that we're giving you for these elements. We're instead using this adaptive locator. So what that means is a lot of times, again, in Salesforce, things are dynamic. Things tend to change. A release comes in, it breaks your test cases, so you have to go in and update them. So what this adaptive locator does is that it gives you a list of locators essentially for the test to utilize. And if the first one fails, it'll fall back to the other locators and essentially apply self-healing for those test steps. So that's what that is doing for these particular steps here. Okay, so I've completed that rental car booking. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into the next status here. So I'll just go ahead and mark this status as complete. And now you notice I don't get any of the component structure inside a test builder. I don't get a locator or anything like that. And that's because this is a built-in metadata supported field. So a lot of the fields, even though it's in a custom application and a custom layout and everything like that, will still be supported through the metadata inside of Provar. So the coverage is actually still really good there. And where we don't have metadata, we can utilize that custom framework that I was showing. Okay, so once we've marked this as the next status, these other steps here are basically what I've already just mapped there. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over that for now and jump into the next part of this test case where it's going to be fulfilling the claim as the insurance producer. So because Provar Test Builder is interactive, this is something that's actually very handy if you're debugging your tests or if you're wanting to get to a point of failure or add additional steps to a particular location. You can right click anywhere in the step in the test case and click step 2, and it'll jump to that particular location in your test case, and then you can resume execution from that point on. So this actually helps a lot. A lot of other solutions actually don't have a way to do this because they utilize what we commonly refer to as record and playback technology. So essentially, you record a flow, and then it has that as basically a recorded instance of you doing it manually. And then it allows you to basically just play back that same recording over and over again. The only problem with that is if anything fails, you have to go in and fix it. What it instead requires you to do is actually re-record the entire scenario. So there's a lot of maintenance, a lot of overhead associated with those, with that kind of workflow. All right, so I'm going to switch over back to my other tab here so we can watch this execute. But basically, this is going to go ahead and just continue our test case. So I'll just resume it from here. It's going to verify that we have an attachment because we did attach an image to this claim. So it's just making sure that that attachment exists. So it indeed is there. And now we're going to move this to the next status that we need to begin evaluating our coverage for this claim and basically just completing the process. And we'll go ahead and click the pay option here because everything has been approved. So coverage has been confirmed. We'll click the pay button field here, and that will basically process the payment for this particular claim. Okay. Well, happy little accidents. So we actually have a failure here. So anytime there is a failure in Provar, you can right click on that element and view the test step output. So if there's a failure message, you'd be able to see that there. Basically, what I have here is a case of it's failing to perform an interaction on the page, most likely because of this being a slightly different setup than I had before, but that's okay. We can actually quickly get around that. So I'll just go ahead and remap this step here. So once again, it's just going to retrieve the information from the web page and give me a an option to be able to interact with this particular web element. So as that's processing here, my Zoom recording is eating up all my bandwidth. Okay, I'm actually just going to go ahead and jump into this one here. Give that one more try. It looks like it's loading this time. Okay, yeah, so I don't know. So there we go. And it looks like it's all coming in good this time. So I'll just go ahead and add and do it. And there we go. That's been resolved. So it's updated for the next run. So now the status is shown as paid. So we can validate that status. We can also go and validate anything else as part of this claim. If we want to add additional coverage, of course, we can add additional steps to this test case. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and finalize it and close it out. So I'll just go ahead and click resume on this test. And it'll move my status just along there, basically just clicking on these different status fields. And then finally closing our claim. So now that the claim's been closed, we can go back over to our case here where we're actually going to begin closing out this particular case record, which is just going to require us to click on that close button and then mark the status as complete. Okay, so our case has been closed. Now, what will happen over here is basically we're just coming in and deleting that claim directly inside the UI, which you normally wouldn't do. But if you're doing any kind of automated testing, what you end up with are a lot of records that can crowd your org with a lot of different additional data. So data management is definitely a part of test automation that we highly recommend at Provar. And we actually have an interesting way of handling that. Typically, what we can do is we can actually enable for all of your connections inside of Salesforce what we call an auto cleanup, where basically it just is a checkbox on your connection step, and it'll automatically clean up at the end of the test case any of the record IDs that you've created throughout the course of that entire scenario. So here I'm just doing it manually just to kind of show that it's not there anymore. And we can go switch over to our community user. And of course, if we refresh this page, it'll give us an error because that claim is no longer there. So there you go. It's been deleted and everything's been processed. Okay, so that's kind of an end-to-end scenario there that you can see how it would work inside of Provar, inside of our insurance console application. That is the end of my scenario for today. Just a couple of brief points on this one. It was a rather long scenario if you're watching it kind of from end to end. So normally what we would do inside of Provar is once we have our happy path to find, which is what we would call this scenario, is basically just going through point A to point B and not accounting for any of kind of the erroneous inputs or anything like that. We would divide this test case up into modular pieces that we refer to as callable test cases. So basically, we can group different parts of the test and we can set them as callable. And what that'll allow us to do is provide input parameters for those sections of the test case and also strip them out of the larger scenario. So that way, if we want to reuse them in other larger test scenarios, we now have that ability to do so. And it simplifies maintenance and also scalability of your automation because it gives you what we call, building blocks basically for all of your test cases. Okay, so yeah, that's the end of my scenario for today. I'll go ahead and jump over to our chat and see. We've had a number of different messages come in, as well as some questions in the QA. I know there were some questions in the actual chat. So I'll get to those after the ones in the Q&A. So we'll go ahead and just kick off the Q&A now. So let's see. First question here is coming in. Want to understand how Provar handled the pop-up of upload files here in this case, or how was that automated exactly? Good question. So switch over to go to a different claim here. So in any case where we have a file upload, such as this one here, Provar actually has a custom way of handling those inputs. We have a special interaction type called upload file. And basically this is a local directory path where you would define it as your file name here. And then what Provar will do is it'll handle clicking on the upload, uploading that file, and then also waiting for that confirmation message to appear before it continues on to the next step. So all that's automated. So you don't need to add in any kind of weights or anything like that, or click the done button or anything. Good question. All right, we had another question. Was the claim number extracted using SOQL Query or some other way? Another good question. We could, in fact, extract it using a SOQL query. We do have built-in SOQL support inside of Provar through the org browser on the desktop side of things. So behind the scenes, this is actually my test case inside of Provar Automation. This is the desktop client. So you can see my full test case here in all of its glory. So you can see I have all of my group steps where I've kind of organized everything. You can read the steps. But in the bottom right here, this is our org browser where you can interact with all the metadata and all the objects in your org. So this is how you would interact with SOQL. So if I want to find a claim, I can just filter for claim and I can drag that into my test case. Then I can do a quick little query here. So I can add a SOQL query. It'll pull in all the fields for that particular object. And then once all the fields have been pulled in, I can select which fields I want to select and customize my query. I can do any create, read, update, or delete for those custom objects. So I can pull in the ID that way or the number that way, of course. But actually what I did is I just scraped it from the web page directly because I was already had the web page open. So I added what we call a UI read assert step inside of Provar, and it basically just pulled in that claim number directly from there. But here's an example where we might do that here. I think it's just name. So I could do name, click OK. This will add a SOQL query to my test case, and I can just say where, whatever I'm looking for, where field name equals my field name, something like that, right? So this will give you a result variable that you can utilize in your test case to refer to later on. So another good question. How do you verify attachments? How did you verify that there is an attachment, or did you also validate it is the same attachment from the community? Good question. So it was a little bit, I'll be honest, it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors there because basically what I did is I essentially just validated that there was a single attachment on that claim. Because it was a brand new claim, because it was the one I just created and just opened, I did know for a fact that if there was an attachment there, it was the correct one. I didn't actually verify the file name or anything like that. We could pull out the file name from the community site and then compare that to what we see inside of Salesforce as well. I just didn't do that here. All right, we had a question. I'm new to Provar. Well, welcome. The question is, have a question related to custom framework for LWC components. Is that designed by automation engineers? How do we create such framework? Is it easy to do for non-automation engineers? So to answer your question in two parts. So the first part, no, it's not designed by automation engineers. We built, hitting my microphone. We actually built a custom framework to handle LWCs. It applies to any LWC. And we make that available to anyone who's utilizing Provar. So you don't have to create your own framework or anything like that. You just take advantage of what we've already built. And the second part of your question, how do you create such a framework? Is it easy to do for non-automation engineers? Well, the answer is you don't have to, but we actually do give you the capability to, in fact, create your own custom packages for anything that's not supported out of the box. That's, of course, not something that you have to do, but we give you that capability and flexibility and power of the platform to go ahead and create your own components for those. It is a proprietary framework, so there is a little bit of a learning curve, but we do have some University of Provar courses available for free online where you can take those. It's just called Nitro X Beginner and Nitro X Advanced, and that'll kind of walk you through that. But it won't do you much good unless you have access to Provar. So I would highly recommend kind of going through the trial process and then maybe going through it that way. Okay, we had a question here. Where do test failures display? Are we able to retrieve those results and trigger other automations? So test failures display changes based on where the tests are running. So right now I'm running them in test builder mode, which is normally not what you would do if you're running this, on a kind of a recurring cadence. Normally you would create your tests in test builder and you would rerun it either just locally by clicking run from the desktop, or you would integrate it with some CI/CD process or platform to run the test cases in a headless environment or on a server. And then the test failures would be reported to wherever you want them to be reported. We actually do have our own reporting application and integration application on the Salesforce App Exchange. It's called Provar Manager. So that's what we use traditionally for reporting. And you'll see all kinds of reporting metrics there for the test step failure. You'll get screenshots, recording, and all of that. So hopefully that answers that question there. It looks like this maybe is a follow-up. Same user asks, potentially trigger a metadata deployment rollback if any tests fail. That's not something that Provar itself would do, but we can configure these types of automations with other DevOps providers and tools, such as like GearSet, Flowsum, AutoRabbit, Prodly. These types of DevOps vendors that we integrate with, we can do any kind of automation. So you could set up quality gates to basically do your deployment or release through those tools. You can trigger the Provar test cases from there, and then you can decide if you want to do a rollback, etc. We have another question here. Does Provar handle shadow objects for normal web applications as well? I'm assuming you mean Shadow DOM, in which case we are expanding our support for external websites outside of Salesforce to include any web-based application. But you don't have to use that framework for everything outside of Salesforce. We actually do have page object model available. So anything that's not metadata or Nitro X, our custom framework, would result to using a traditional page object. So we give you those locators through test builders, so you don't need to inspect the page or define them, but that's how it's traditionally done for generic websites. Question here. What's the major differences you have noticed in working with Financial Services Cloud compared to Sales and Service Cloud? So a lot of the major differences are kind of around these custom actions and custom flows and pages, of course. Everything in here, it looks familiar if you're familiar with sales and service and you've never seen Financial Services Cloud. It's essentially just a wrapper on top of those, right? They have a lot of custom objects, a lot of custom pages and layouts and things like that. So all of this is going to be metadata supported, these types of pages. But where you get into these custom pages, like this financial section here, this is going to be more, of course, nuanced of approach because it's not metadata. Like I was showing you, it's using that custom framework. So it really just kind of depends on what your flow involves. But the major differences are there's just less metadata support for Financial Services Cloud than there is sales and service. Upload files on the community side is also automated in the same way as Salesforce. Yes, it's handled the exact same way. We had a question here on shadow root elements. How are shadow root elements identification handled in Provar? Are those recorded or identified? We kind of take care of that for you, so you don't have to worry about what the shadow root is or anything like that for elements that you're interacting with. So I would say they're handled in the standard way that anything else is handled in Provar. It just recognizes where the element is and then pulls in the best way to locate it. As far as where they're recorded, we do on the back end, you have access to all the page objects that Provar generates and all of the frameworks that are being used. So that is available to you. We have a question here. Is it possible to run the same scenario with different data using CSV as a data input? Great question. And definitely. And in fact, I would recommend that. So in this scenario, all the data that I used was pretty static, just for a demo, of course. But if you're actually wanting to run automation in a higher level environment over and over again, every release, on a schedule, that kind of thing, ideally you would have a data driven test case that pulled in data from CSV, JSON, text, or Excel file. So we can import from any of those files inside of Provar, and you can use that data to populate all the data in your test case. We have a question here. Can we validate text and PDF files attached? We can. PDF validation is a bit of an interesting, I'll say, challenge traditionally. The way that we handle it in Provar is we actually are able to extract all the contents of a PDF that you've downloaded inside of Provar, and then we can strip off, and look for a specific text in that PDF and add that as a validation in your test. We have a question here from Anonymous. Can we identify the metadata changes after a deployment or Salesforce object upgrade? That's a great question. I guess my answer would be it really just kind of depends on what those changes are and what you're wanting to do specifically. So Provar itself is just kind of an automation platform, right? It gives you the platform to be able to create all your test cases, through an automated way and then run those back. If you're wanting to detect metadata changes and pick up on things like that, usually requires like an integration with a DevOps tool to be able to do deployments or, detect changes and things like that. That being said, for anything that's metadata supported, so like just for example here, if you're right clicking and adding to your test case a step or an element that's metadata supported, if that field label changes or if the layout changes or anything like that, you don't need to update your test case. So Provar automatically detects those changes and it'll use the dynamic locator for those elements to be able to recognize them at runtime. So the answer is if it's metadata supported, it doesn't matter. It'll continue to be supported and it'll continue to work. If it's not metadata supported and if it's not one of our adaptive locators, then you may have to go in and update those locators if there's significant changes, depending on which one you used for that element. Can Provar automatically execute failed tests again? Yes, we have a feature inside of Provar to enable you to be able to re-execute failed steps. Or failed test cases. You can set a threshold for that. And yeah, we can do that. Can we automate any other browser app except Salesforce for end-to-end testing? Yes, I demonstrated that on the community site. That is not on Salesforce. And you can also do any website. Anything that has web accessible page, we can automate. We can also automate any REST or SOAP-based API, database, or email connection. Do we need to buy separate tools like Sauce Labs for parallel runs? Not sure exactly what you mean by that in terms of your requirement, but I will say Provar, what a license of Provar comes with an execution license that you could use to execute in parallel on any CI platform. So you don't need to buy things like Sauce Labs. It really just depending on what you're trying to do with your execution. If you're trying to run across different browsers, different platforms, and things like that, then we don't provide that infrastructure out of the box. That's an additional fee. We do have our own kind of version of, browser-based services, and that's through our App Exchange product inside of Salesforce as well. Question, how easy is conversion of tests from Sales and Service Cloud to Financial Services Cloud? I'm assuming you mean creating tests in one and then creating tests in the other. You wouldn't typically be creating a test in sales and then trying to make it run in financial services cloud. That doesn't usually translate. There's going to be different flows. There's going to be different layouts, different pages, different personas that you're testing as. So usually those would be separate scenarios. But it kind of just depends on, I guess, what your flow is there. As far as how easy it is, again, it's just going to depend. As you saw me kind of build out this scenario here, a lot of it was just standard support. I didn't need to do any kind of custom work to get my test steps to work inside of Financial Services Cloud. Really just depends on how long your scenario is, how many personas are involved. There's a lot of complexity that could result in it being a little bit more challenging. A question: what is percentage of automation script failure versus actual app defects while executions? I think I know what the question is. You're basically asking about false positives, that kind of thing. Um, Again, that's going to depend on your tests and what the failure is. So a good example would be if I have a test that's verifying that a user can log in, purchase a product from our e-commerce site, and complete the checkout process. And, let's say our API services for the checkout process are down. So they can't complete that process. The test determines that that's, a failure. So that's a defect, right? That's best case scenario. But sometimes automation could fail sometimes, right? And it could not be a failure in your application. That percentage is not defined. It totally just depends on how robust your automation is, the flakiness of the environment that you're testing, if there's a lot of load or issues in your environment, like if there's 100 users logged in and everything slows down quite significantly, and you're also running automation, then you may see some false positives in that scenario. But it really just kind of depends. There's a lot of factors. Hard to give a percentage there. Question: will Provar validate the charts from the data? I don't exactly know what this question is asking. So maybe if you can rephrase. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're asking in that sense. Do we have a direct integration with test management tools, CI tools like Jenkins? Yes. Yes. Provar has direct integration with most CI platforms. I haven't come across one that we haven't supported today in my 5.5 years at Provar. And Jenkins, of course, is included in that. It's a very commonly used one. And we integrate with different test management tools such as Zephyr, X-Ray, TestRail, Qtest. We also have our own, which I would encourage you to check out on the App Exchange. Is there anything like creating different test framework in Provar like we have traditional test automation like Selenium? So I think I know what you're trying to ask here. You can create as many page objects in Provar as you wish. You can even create custom page object operations. And in fact, we even let you write your own custom Java code and inject, whatever you want into your project as dependencies and run custom Java as part of your test if you wish. It's not something you have to do, but we give you that full flexibility if you want to go to that level. So anything that you can do in Selenium, you can do in Provar. I'll just kind of leave it at that and then some. How to handle test case with small differences based on, for example, the user role permission set, different orgs. This is a good question. So in the case where you're doing persona-based testing and you may have two different users who have slightly different layouts, maybe one has access to a field and the other doesn't, or maybe they have different sections where the fields are grouped differently based on the persona or the profile. How you build out your test case is going to determine kind of how that's being handled from the Provar side. So for example, if you're creating a test to just complete all the fields there and all the fields are accessible in both, then it's not going to matter what the layout differences are. That's not going to change the test case at all because nothing in terms of the layout is going to affect or impact the failure or the pass of that particular scenario. As far as permission sets go, that could be a little bit different. You may have a case where a user doesn't have access to a field and another one does. Let's say you've built out the test to automate a scenario for the user that does have access to the field. Well, if you try to run that as a user who doesn't have access, obviously it's going to fail. So things like that are kind of, that's the obvious result, but there are, of course, a lot of nuances to that. So it really just depends on your scenario. Someone's posting a question from the chat window. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the Q&A. I know there's questions also in the chat. I can get to some of those. I'm trying to clear out the Q&A. This question is, can we run, for example, 100 tests simultaneously? Does Provar support that by default license, or we need additional licenses to buy that kind of support? Yeah, I mean, it's totally dependent on your infrastructure. If you're just coming in out of the box and wanting to run 100 tests, you can by all means do that. If you have 100 servers, or if you have 100, different machines that could run Provar automation, then you can kick them all off in parallel. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. However, we do have what's called an execution license. So if you want to run 10 tests in parallel on different machines, that's going to require 10 execution licenses. Those execution licenses come at a discounted option. So based on bulk, and of course, based on your number of regular licenses. So they're much cheaper than our actual full developer license. But yes, that's kind of how it would work. We also have what's called our grid, which basically allows you to run in parallel across any machine, any browser, and you can do that out of the box with Provar. Again, that's of course a license model that we base that on. It's not on usage. So that's how that would work. I think this is a rephrasing of a previous question. Can we achieve table data validation in Salesforce with Provar? Yes. We can interact with any tables inside of Salesforce, any data tables, lightning tables, fully supported. You can read values from those tables, validate them, interact with them, etc. Can we create utilities in Provar? Can do some common actions than maybe what Provar provides? Yes. Yes. So I kind of covered that earlier, but you can create your own custom page object operations, custom functions in Provar through Java. And you can also create callable test cases to parameterize those and make those accessible to other flows. Okay, I got through all the Q&A there. Is there, I know there was some questions in the chat. I think we were able to answer all the questions from the chat as well. I'm looking through here. It looks like everyone kind of rephrased their question and put it in the Q&A. So thank you for doing that. So I think that's any last questions. I think that's all of our questions that we had currently. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending today's session. Great engagement, great questions. Really enjoyed that. And there will be a follow-up. So there is going to be a follow-up survey, I believe you'll be receiving after this is concluded. There will also be a recording via email, as Amber's just noted there. And we had one last question come in, which it's got AI in it, so I'll answer it. It's, do we have any Gen AI features? Yes. So we have multitude of different generative AI features currently in the product. Our latest one involves test data generation. So this allows you to basically do what you normally do when you're seeding data in your different orgs, like sandboxes or scratch orgs. We have a function that allows you to generate test data in any org that you wish, and it's AI generated, so it's randomized, so it uses a good amount of permutations for the data, and that's all AI driven. So that's in the product today. So you can go up to 1,000 records at once, and it's a matter of seconds. So you can seed all of your sandboxes prior to your automated test cases running. There's a number of other ones. If you want to know more about our AI capabilities, definitely reach out to us. We can discuss kind of those in more detail, but that's the latest. So I'll leave you with that. And I think that's all the questions. We covered all of our talking points for today. So thank you all so much again for coming, and hope you enjoyed today's webinar and demo on Financial Services Cloud. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.